NASCAR gaming is honestly an odd space, but a really interesting one at that. You have so many different tiers of games and so many different eras as well, from the beginning era all the way to what we're at right now, which could be the Dark Ages. But to me, what was really interesting is the Eutechnix era and just after it, because so much change that influenced the little pickle that we're in today with it. You see, for me, NASCAR 15 is an interesting game to look at because it's right technically after the Eutechnix era, an era that was preceded by the NASCAR Thunder series as well as games like NR 2003 and Dirt to Daytona, the greatest NASCAR games to ever be made. And it's also right before the highly publicized struggles of the NASCAR Heat games as well as the atrocity of Ignition. And the Eutechnix series in general is one that is almost kind of overlooked, or at least one that goes up and down. It started with NASCAR 2011, and listen, I don't care what fun people got out of it, that game was not a good game. You had NASCAR Inside Line. That was a game that honestly was loved. But then you had 15. NASCAR, the game 2015, is one I think that comes up a lot, and it came up a lot during the Heat series as being a game that people liked. Released on May 22nd, 2015, with Jeff Gordon on the cover, it was available on PS3, Xbox 360, and the PC. And released by Duesenberry Martin, it used different assets of the Eutechnix series, so many erroneously think that this is a Eutechnix game. But, in fact, it's its own thing. It's basically the prequel to the Heat series. And they also had the Victory edition that was out as well in October of 2015. And what I want to look at with this game is the pros and the cons, and then about a decade after its release, I want to give my definitive final verdict. Let's start out with the positives on it. The pros, starting with the fact that it actually drove well at times. It was very similar, almost a clone of everything from Inside Line to 2014, and honestly, that wasn't too much of a bad thing at different tracks. Tracks, for instance, like Homestead Miami Speedway or Kansas Speedway, were some of the most fun games to play on this game. And you know what? For all the hell that we give this track, Texas Motor Speedway on NASCAR 15 was honestly a lot of fun. And in general, if you were able to set the car up right, and especially on online lobbies, if you were able to get with the right people, this was one of the most fun games to play. Now, that does not mean that it's a good game because you had to tinker it the right way, but it has the ability to be a ton of fun. And in doing that, it pretty much puts itself well over games like Heat Evolution, Heat 2, 3, and you could even argue Heat 4 and 5. And that's something that Duesenberry Martin Racing really never got past. This is probably, when it comes to just how the cars drive in and of themselves alone, the best game that they ever put together. And you can really see the Eutechnix instruments being used on this game. Also, I will say this, until Ignition, which was a good-looking game, this was probably the best-looking game that NASCAR gaming had ever seen. NASCAR gaming in general has been a bit behind when it comes to graphics and how it looks, but this one was at least somewhat looking like a modern-gen game for the time. And with that, you know what, that's probably a reason a lot of people would go back to it after how ugly the initial Heat games were. This game also had a really good paint booth, just like the Eutechnix games. And it was great and even better with modding being added in on the PC side of things. You would see people being able to use all the creativity they could with different paint schemes or use historical paint schemes to race against those modern ones for the time, and it was a lot of fun to see just how far people would go with it. Yeah, sometimes you'd have crazy stuff on it that probably shouldn't be, but other times you would have clear masterpieces made, and I can definitely tell that a lot of people who are now in the modern design space in NASCAR probably had their start, or at least part of their start, on games like NASCAR 15 with their paint booth. And in hindsight, it's probably the best NASCAR game that we got in the last 10 years or so. It's not to say that we really had a good game with this, but compared to what we had after it, and honestly, with what we had in the decade after it, it was not as bad as some people made it sound. It wasn't the greatest, but still, it was pretty good, and it helped fuel the NASCAR online league community for the good part of half a decade or so, until the Heat games improved enough for people to convert over to that one. But with every pro, there also is a con. Starting with glitching issues, especially on the PC game, but in general with the AI, the glitching issues for NASCAR 15 at times were just unacceptable and abysmal, especially when they would go down pit road. The AI would just not know what to do, stop on track, and more often than not, you had zero warning, causing a crash and messing up what was honestly probably a good race for you. As much as I say I loved Homestead in Kansas, the AI so many times would check up or crash you trying to get to pit road that it just made it unraceable after about 60 or so laps. And with that, it was honestly just like the games before it. I remember looking at different videos about games like NASCAR 2013 and 14, and honestly, it looks exactly the same as NASCAR 15. The only difference that would give it away is paint schemes from a later year than those games were out, or vice versa. The varying quality of this game as well was difficult. One race, you could have it great, everything go right. The next one, the AI could ruin it, or it would just glitch out. Tracks were the same way. Some tracks were better than others. Road courses would be good at times. Other times it's super speedways, but they'd get too spread out. It was always basically just a roll of the dice. And the platforms as well. PC definitely had a lot of struggles with it, and you would also see some of these carry over to the console side as well. It just kind of, honestly, as a game, fades into the background of the NASCAR gaming scene. Honestly, when it came out, I didn't realize there was a new game. It looks pretty amateur, especially the cover itself. It looks like something that somebody can make in Photoshop in maybe an hour max, and honestly, it just was something that kind of came and went. And you can tell by how many people think it's a Eutechnix game, how many people didn't know it came out, how many people played the Victory Edition instead. It's just a game that was there. So my verdict for it is, well, it's just mediocre.
Mediocre?
Many will talk highly of it, or did at the time, due to how bad the Heat games that they had as a comparison were at the time. But this game is really something that you only put on when you have no other game to play, and you just have to have some mindless fun for 30 minutes before you finally put the controller down, because the game will piss you off. Enjoyment, in my opinion, fully depends on the player rather than the gaming experience. So, I gotta say it's mediocre, but what do you think? Do you think that I'm too harsh on this game, or I'm too lenient? Let me know down in the comments below. And while you're at it, leave a like on this video, share this video, and subscribe to this channel for more great and fun NASCAR content. Thank you so much to all my channel members for your continued support, and until next time, have a good one.